The day my grandmother's will was read. My cousin walked in wearing a new suit. I remember thinking that was strange. We had buried her only 6 days earlier. Everyone assumed they already knew how the afternoon would end. My cousin had spent the last decade building her restaurant chain into something remarkable. She had turned my grandmother's one little diner on Elm Street into 6 locations across 2 counties. She had the instincts, the energies, the business mind. She was the obvious choice, the golden grandchild, the one grandma always introduced first at family dinners. I was the other one. My name is Willa. I taught 2nd grade at Millbrook Elementary for 8 years. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I lived 40 minutes from town in a farmhouse that needed new gutters and always would. I had no business degree, no investment portfolio, no LinkedIn profile with connections in the hundreds. What I had was a Tuesday afternoon every single week for nearly 4 years. Sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table drinking coffee that was always too strong, listening to her talk about the garden, about her late husband, about the way Route 9 used to look before they widened it in 1987. My cousin's name was Priscilla. Everyone called her Pris, which suited her. She was polished in a way I never figured out how to be. Manicured nails, pressed blazers, a way of walking into a room that made people turn and look. She had taken one small diner and, over 10 years, grown it into something that made real money. My grandmother had given her the first location as a gift when Pris turned 30. Said she believed in her. Said the girl had her grandfather's head for numbers. At every family gathering, the adults talked about what Pris was building. How she had negotiated a second location. How she had handled a difficult contractor. How she had pivoted the menu during the pandemic and kept all 6 locations open when half the restaurants in the county were closing for good. She was the family's success story. Nobody said it plainly, but everyone understood. When Grandma died, Pris would get the business. That was simply how it was going to be. What nobody talked about was what happened when Grandma stopped being able to drive herself to her own doctor appointments. I was the one who drove her. Every Tuesday I rearranged my lesson plans. Every Thursday morning when she needed labs done, I left my apartment by 6 and picked her up by 7, so she wouldn't have to sit in a waiting room alone. When her hip got bad and the stairs became dangerous, I spent 3 weekends in a row, helping my uncle install a proper rail along the back hallway. I bought a second shower chair because the one he had kept slipping on the tile. I learned which pharmacy had the fastest turnaround on her prescriptions. I memorized the names of every medication she took and what each one was for, because there came a point when she couldn't always remember herself, and her doctors needed someone who could answer clearly. Pris sent flowers on her birthday. Beautiful arrangements, always from the nicest place in town. She called on major holidays. She showed up at Thanksgiving with expensive wine and told funny stories and made everyone laugh. She was wonderful at being present when it was convenient. I was there the other times. I was there at 2 in the morning when Grandma called because she had fallen trying to get to the bathroom and was too embarrassed to call anyone else. I was there when the home health aide quit without notice. And we spent 3 weeks scrambling for someone reliable. I was there the afternoon she was having a hard day, couldn't remember my grandfather's middle name, and cried quietly for an hour while I just held her hand and didn't say much of anything, because there wasn't much to say. I never once thought about what I would inherit. That isn't false modesty. It genuinely didn't cross my mind most of those Tuesdays. She was my grandmother. She had known me since I was born. She used to brush my hair when I was little and call me her serious girl. I was there because I loved her, and because she needed someone to be there, and because nobody else was going to do it. But I was also human enough that the comments stung. At the funeral, my aunt leaned over and whispered that Grandma would have wanted Pris to expand the business to a 7th location. At the reception, one of my uncles patted my arm and said I was a good girl for helping out. Like I had been babysitting. Like 4 years of showing up counted as a small favor, rather than a life reorganized around someone else's needs. Pris made a toast. It was beautiful. She talked about my grandmother's vision, her courage, what it meant to have a woman build something from nothing. I stood near the back and listened. Part of me was genuinely moved. Part of me felt invisible in a way I had no language for yet. The will reading was set for the following Thursday, at the office of a lawyer named Mr. Graves, downtown on Harper Street. I almost didn't go. I had a meeting with a parent at school and a stack of papers to return by Friday. My mother called and said I should be there, so I went. The room was smaller than I expected. Dark wood furniture, the kind that smells like furniture polish and old paper. There was a rectangular table and maybe a dozen chairs. My aunt was there with her husband, two of my uncles, several cousins I see once a year at most, and Pris, sitting near the head of the table with her back perfectly straight, wearing a charcoal blazer and the specific expression of someone who already knows the ending. She caught my eye when I walked in and smiled. It was the kind of smile that's only 15% warm. Mr. Graves was a thin man with reading glasses and a very deliberate way of speaking. The kind of person who pauses before every important sentence, as if he knows exactly what weight each word carries. He opened the folder. He read through the preliminary language, the small items, a few pieces of jewelry, some specific pieces of furniture that went to specific people. My aunt got the china cabinet. One of my uncles got the pickup truck. Normal things. Then he reached the main event. The 6 restaurant locations operating under the name Grandma's Table, including all trademarks, vendor contracts, and operating licenses, shall pass in full to Priscilla Ann Dunmore. Pris exhaled slowly. A few people at the table nodded, like this confirmed something they already knew. Mr. Graves continued. The residential property at 4412 Old Birch Road, including the structure and all land attached to the deed, shall pass in full to Wilhelmina Grace Calloway. I felt my face go still. Old Birch Road. That was the farmhouse. The old one, out past the county line. I had been there maybe 3 or 4 times in my whole life. Big drafty place my great-grandparents had built. Nobody had lived in it full-time in years. The roof had issues. There was a well that my grandmother always said needed inspection. The back field had been leased to a neighboring farmer for decades. But I had no idea what that arrangement looked like on paper. The room buzzed immediately. People glanced at each other. One of my aunts made a sound I can only describe as a wince. Pris turned and looked at me directly. She had the strangest expression on her face. Not angry exactly, more like amused in a way she wasn't bothering to hide. The farmhouse, she said. Not a question. Just the 2 words, delivered with a small upward pull at one corner of her mouth. I didn't say anything. Willa. She tilted her head. You drove her to doctor appointments for 4 years, and you got the farmhouse. Someone at the table made an uncomfortable sound. My uncle looked at his coffee. Pris leaned forward slightly. I mean, what are you even going to do with it? You can barely afford your gutters. I felt heat rise in my chest. At least you showed up, she added, and her voice had that particular quality of a compliment shaped like a knife. Maybe if you'd shown up a little more meaningfully, you'd have gotten something real. The room went completely silent. I opened my mouth. I had no idea what was going to come out of it. Before I could speak, Mr. Graves removed his reading glasses, set them down, and cleared his throat with the specific intention of a man who had been waiting to do exactly that. There is an additional matter, he said calmly, that your grandmother asked me to address only after the primary distribution was announced. Every person in the room turned toward him. Pris leaned back in her chair. What is it? She asked. A box of old quilts? Nobody laughed. Mr. Graves opened a second folder. This one was thinner than the first, but there was a sealed envelope on top that looked personal. Cream-colored paper, no label. Your grandmother left a letter, he said. She asked that I read it aloud to everyone present. I felt something shift in my chest. My grandmother had never been someone who wrote things down formally. If she had written a letter for a lawyer to read, it was because she had something she needed, said in a room. She knew she wouldn't be able to stand in herself. Mr. Graves opened the envelope and unfolded 2 pages of handwritten paper. He began to read. To my family. If you are hearing this, I am gone. Please don't spend too much time crying, because I had a good run and I knew it, and most people can't say that. A few people around the table laughed softly, which I think was exactly what she intended. I have tried to leave what I had to the people who I believed could use it best. The business goes to Priscilla because she built it with me, and she knows how to keep building. I am proud of what she made. I believe she will make more. Pris nodded slightly, chin lifted. But I want to say something about the other kind of work. The kind that doesn't appear on a balance sheet. The kind. Nobody toasts at a reception. The nodding stopped. For nearly 4 years, one person in this family reorganized her life around mine without ever once making me feel like a burden. She drove me to appointments when I was too proud to admit I was frightened. She sat with me on the hard days, when she had her own hard days she never mentioned. She learned the names of my medications because she was afraid I would get confused, and she was right that I sometimes did. She never asked what she was going to get. She only asked what I needed next. My eyes were burning. I pressed my lips together and stared at the table. People in this family talk a great deal about building things. What Willa built was harder to see and harder still to measure, but I saw it. Every Tuesday I saw it. Several people had gone quiet in a way that felt different from politeness. My aunt was looking at her hands. Mr. Graves turned the page. That is why, in addition to the residential property, I have arranged for something else to pass to Willa. I asked Mr. Graves to now explain the details of the Old Birch Road land rights, which I chose to keep separate from my main estate documents for reasons that will become clear. Mr. Graves set the letter down and reached into his briefcase. He removed a second document, thicker than anything else on the table, and set it in front of him. Approximately 8 years ago, he said, your grandmother quietly commissioned a full survey and subsurface assessment of the Old Birch Road property. At that time, the results indicated significant potential for natural gas extraction on the northern portion of the land. No one spoke. She subsequently worked with an energy attorney and retained all mineral and extraction rights attached to that parcel, separately from the deed itself, which many property owners failed to preserve. Those rights have been consolidated and are now included in the transfer to Wilhelmina. I heard someone exhale sharply across the table. 6 months before her death, Mr. Graves continued, your grandmother was approached by Meridian Energy Partners, a regional development company that had been quietly acquiring rights in this county for the past 3 years. They submitted a formal lease proposal for the Old Birch Road mineral rights. Pris uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. What kind of proposal? She asked. Her voice was different now. Slower. Mr. Graves looked at her over the top of his glasses. A 40-year extraction lease with an upfront signing bonus and ongoing quarterly royalties. The projected total value over the life of the lease, including the signing payment, is estimated at between $4 and $6 million, depending on yield. The room erupted. My aunt's husband knocked his coffee. One of my uncles said something I couldn't make out. Pris sat completely still, which somehow was louder than any of the noise. That can't be right, she said. It is, Mr. Graves said. He slid a copy of the Meridian proposal across the table toward me. Willa is also free to decline the lease and negotiate other terms, or to sell the rights outright. Multiple options remain available. I stared at the papers in front of me. The number on the top line was very clear. Pris picked up her own copy of the document. She read the first page, then the second. I watched the color leave her face in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. She knew, Pris said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. She knew this whole time. Mr. Graves returned to my grandmother's letter. He had one more paragraph. I also want Priscilla to know something, because I love her and I want her to understand this clearly. The restaurants are a real and valuable thing, but they carry real responsibilities. There are outstanding loans I took on for the 4th and 5th locations that have not been fully disclosed in the standard documents because I handled those personally. Mr. Graves has the details. Priscilla will need to address those before she can move forward cleanly. I am not saying this to punish her. I am saying it because I want her to know the full picture before she walks out of this room, thinking she has already won. Pris went very still. She looked at Mr. Graves. "What loans?" she said. He opened a third folder. The number he placed in front of her was not small. She stared at it for a long time. The room that had been so loud a minute ago was absolutely silent. Mr. Graves finished reading my grandmother's letter. "I have tried to leave things fairly, which is not the same as leaving them equally. Willa cared for me when there was no obvious reason to. She didn't do it because she expected a reward. I know that because I watched her face every Tuesday for 4 years, and I never once saw her calculating. I saw her paying attention. That is a rare thing. I wanted to give her something just as rare." He folded the pages carefully and returned them to the envelope. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then my aunt, who had been looking at her hands since the middle of the letter, looked up at me. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, once, in a way that somehow meant more than a speech would have. Pris stood up. She picked up the folder Mr. Graves had given her. She didn't look at me. She walked to the door, opened it, and paused with her hand on the frame. I thought she was going to say something. She didn't. She walked out. I sat there for a moment after the room started to empty. The Meridian proposal was still in my hands. The paper felt strange. Too light for something that heavy. Mr. Graves came around the table and sat in the chair next to mine. He folded his hands. "Your grandmother retained me for nearly 30 years, he said. She was one of the clearest thinking people I ever worked with. She planned this particular arrangement over a period of several years, very deliberately." I nodded. I couldn't find words yet. "She told me once," he said, "that she wasn't worried about the business. She said the business had someone who would fight for it. She was more concerned about making sure the right person had stability." I thought about every Tuesday. I thought about the coffee that was always too strong. I thought about the afternoon she couldn't remember my grandfather's middle name, and we just sat there together in the quiet of the kitchen, while the light came through the yellow curtains, and neither of us said much of anything. "She was thinking about me," I said. It came out strange, almost like a question. "She was thinking about you," he said, "for a long time." I drove home in my 10-year-old Honda Civic on the same roads I always drove. The sky was doing that specific October thing where it goes completely gold about an hour before dark. I had the Meridian proposal on the passenger seat. I had my grandmother's voice in my head, the one from all those Tuesday mornings, telling me about the garden and Route 9, and things that seemed small until they weren't. I didn't cry until I pulled into my driveway. Not because I was sad, because it turned out that all those Tuesdays had been seen. Because someone who mattered had watched and understood and quietly spent years making sure I knew it, in the most permanent way she could figure out how. The gutters still needed to be fixed. The farmhouse on Old Birch Road probably needed a new roof. There were forms to sign and lawyers to call, and decisions to make about things I didn't fully understand yet. But for the first time since losing my grandmother, I felt something steady settle into my chest. She hadn't left me a fortune because she felt sorry for me. She hadn't left me anything out of guilt or obligation. She left it because she had been paying attention, and what she saw was worth investing in. That was the thing about my grandmother. She always knew the difference between what something looked like and what it actually was. She built a diner into a small empire, and she also knew that the most valuable things rarely came with a price tag on them. I smiled sitting there in my driveway, in the dark, in my old car. I smiled because she had been right about that her whole life, and I think she wanted to make sure I knew she knew it too.